You're listening to another episode of I'd Rather Be Writing.com. My name is Tom Johnson, and today I'm talking with Bob Watson, and we're going to be focusing on an upcoming API documentation course that Bob is teaching at the University of Washington. And Bob, can you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us kind of where you're based and what you're planning with the upcoming course.
Yeah, so I'm Bob Watson. I think is this my third time on your podcast? I lost count, but it seemed
Could
like
be.
wow, I've been around for a while. Yeah, so I've been a technical writer for most of the century, and the University of Washington reached out and thought, what would I think about teaching an API documentation course? And I thought, well, how could I pass that up? So yeah. But yeah, I've been doing technical writing at, I was counting at like I interviewed at 3 of the 5 FAANGs and worked at 2 of them. So, I saw someone counting that in LinkedIn and thought, oh, no, there's an interesting statistic. But anyway, and right now I'm working for a startup, doing some documentation for them. And it's never a dull moment.
Yeah, I was just reviewing kind of your LinkedIn profile to get the latest and so on. You've worked at Microsoft for a number of years. You worked at Google. You worked at Amazon. Aren't those 3 of the big tech companies?
So yeah, I think the FAANG is the Facebook. Is it Amazon or Apple? I guess Amazon and Apple, Netflix and Google. And I interviewed at Netflix a long time ago, but never got a job there. But I worked at Google and Amazon, and I don't know why Microsoft isn't there. I guess that doesn't make for a very pronounceable acronym, but
well,
that was kind of where I started off as a technical writer.
I've heard a new acronym for instead of FAANG, somebody proposed the acronym TAN Mama. And it stood, oh my gosh, I can't even remember all the companies, but it was a lot more encompassing. Maybe I'll look that up. I heard that on a podcast, but it definitely included like Microsoft in there, and included some other things. Anyway, you've got a lot of experience. You've got a lot of experience working at companies doing API documentation. You've also been pretty active, or I believe, in the API Pronovix. Sorry, what am I trying to say? They're like developer portal,
dev portal
contests.
Awards,
yeah. You've been a judge there. What, 2-3 years?
I think last year was my 5th time, which seems really hard to imagine. But
wow,
yeah,
5 times.
So yeah, and that's been an interesting ride too, to watch how dev portals are starting to kind of come into the spotlight, and then each year after year get better and better, and it's like it's amazing what the contestants have been able to do. It's like each time it gets harder and harder to judge because they get better and better, and it's harder to discriminate. So it's last year's was a pretty close pack.
Yeah, I did that just 1 year, and I realized what a like immense time commitment it was, as well as like how difficult it is to judge documentation and the different like criteria you can use, and it's a lot of thought and effort. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure that gives you a lot of insight and experience about trends and what's going on, and what, I don't know, prompts thought about what actually makes for good API documentation. So you've got a well-rounded and broad view of the industry beyond just the places you've worked.
Yeah, no, the contestants have been increasingly impressive, and it just leaves me like honored to be able to be I don't feel worthy to be in a position to judge them. It's like they're working way harder than I am.
Well, I want to talk and focus a little bit more on this API course you're teaching, because it seems like historically the academia hasn't really offered API documentation courses. This has always been something that has irked me. Like I always feel like, hey, this is a huge topic. This is important. Like this is what a lot of people want to upskill in. And why isn't it more common in the academia? Well, I mean, Um, if we're trying to close the gap between what practitioner skills or what practitioners want to learn and the academic offerings, why not offer it? So, how did you finally like help bring this course to be?
Well, last summer they actually reached out to me, and so I thought, well, it's kind of an odd call, but sure, let's see what they're talking, what they're interested in, and they had all the magic words like API documentation and training technical writers, and I thought, well, I can't think of a higher calling than that, and so we're working on it since last summer, and in increasing intensity, and I think that. And first of all, this is offered by the professional and continuing education side of the University of Washington. So, of all groups, they are definitely focused in what's practical. And after 20 years, I guess API documentation is being recognized as being practical. We've known that for a lot longer than that, but it takes a while to for the awareness to kind of bubble up and reach the critical mass, I guess. And so I thought, sure, this nothing like an interesting challenge to catch my interest. But yeah, so I guess they've recognized that it's a increasingly in demand skill, and they also have the kind of the technical and professional writing courses in that in the professional continuing education, and so this is. Kind of a specialization in that. So after you get the kind of general technical writing skills, then they get the you can specialize in like medical writing if that's where you want to head, or now API documentation if that's where you want to head. And I don't know if we have any other things in the pipeline, but it's an essentially an extension of their technical writing program.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I was kind of looking at the program details again, and I see that you first either have to complete the technical writing curriculum or have a couple of years of experience as a technical writer. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think one of the questions you sent was like, what because it's hard to know where to start with API documentation because I think we both kind of absorbed into it. I started as a developer, and so I kind of came at it from that side, and so I had to learn the writing side, and so that's what we're trying to address with the prerequisites. It's like you have to bring a little bit of one or the other, and then we'll kind of shore up the other half. Either you got the technical figured out and we'll work on the writing, or you have the writing figured out, we'll work on the technical. And so that's pretty much the first half of the class, is to sort of reach a kind of a level in both categories that we can then proceed into the documentation of APIs. But yeah, it's not quite sure where I went with that, but it's I think it's like I said, it's recognized, and we want to be able to take people who are coming from documentation and want to expand into the API technical side, or come in from software development and want to either bolster their writing skills to do their own documentation, or take it, as their dedicated role as a writer, coming from the software development track like I did.
I think you're somewhat unique in the field. We talked about how you've been a technical writer working with APIs, developer docs for a lot of companies, a lot of years. You've also been an academic. You've taught at Mercer and had other academic, like you have a PhD. You've done a lot of research. Do you think that are there many other people like you who are both like API documentation, skilled writers, developer kind of background as well as academics?
No, because most people pick one and stick with it, and that's something I've not been particularly inclined to do. So I haven't met too many people that have my sort of similar career path. I think there's a few out there, but I definitely took the windy road to get to where I am. But I think it gives me, kind of the blessing and the curse of that is it gives me a rather unique perspective that I'm not sure I've been able to communicate effectively with others, because it's hard to relate, and so, but in over the years, I think I've kind of identified what is going to help, pass this on to the next generation, I guess. And so that's what we've been working on while developing the class, is to find the messages that will resonate with the different backgrounds, so that kind of raise them up, from wherever they're starting.
Well, let's dig into this a little deeper. Why is it that so many, like so many other academic programs in TechCom, don't really offer API docs? And why do so many TechCom academics kind of focus more on maybe theory or broader topics and shy away from more of a technical domain?
Ooh, well, that's a loaded question. Well, in my experience, I think very few percentage-wise of the sort of technical writing academics come from a developer background. Most come through kind of a liberal arts in English, or some a background, on that side of the campus, and so you stick with, I guess, what you enjoy. That's what got you tuned to technical writing and through the PhD program or whatever, and so they just kind of pursue that, and that's one of the things you need to survive and come out on the other side of a PhD program is a pretty clear focus that you can commit to for your whole life, for 5 years or so. And so I don't think there are many people in the technical writing side they're going to do that for API documentation. Me, but and the computer science field programs and other. I mean, some of the research in API documentation. In fact, I think most of the research that I didn't write comes from the computer science side of things into the technical writing. And I think I wrote a blog post about that. It's interesting how all of and this was like 2018. I haven't looked it up to see if it's continued, but they don't cite any technical writing resources in their because that's not what they're familiar with. Or I would imagine. I don't know. I haven't talked to them to ask why. But I know
Yeah.
that was one of the comments. I says, it'd be nice if they talk to some of the writing people who actually study, what works from a reading comprehension perspective, while I'll just say, looking at all the tools to automate it. It's like, you can automate the documentation, sure, but is it going to be readable? It's like, well, that's for another person to figure out. So,
Yeah, that it is interesting. I mean, I remember uh, some years ago just looking for research, TechCom research in about API documentation, best practices, other topics, and just coming up empty-handed in the typical journals where tech writing topics are published. Like STC's journal, for example, and only really finding things in computer sciencey journals, the IEEE type publications, and so on, which I know also has a professional publications journal, and so on. But typically, yeah, it seems like most of the research that I found that resonated with me was done by people who are like computer scientists, and that's weird, but
well, yeah, and that was my experience. It's when I would look for research or articles to reference, they all came from computer science schools, from various parts of the world.
And it's still very good research. I mean, I'm not knocking it by any means. I just it's always just been this weird conundrum. It's like API documentation has consistently been a trending topic and has always been something that a lot of people want to cement their skills in and develop. And yet, it's really been something that hasn't had more attention and focus in academia. And that's what's, always perplexed me. And your answer about how, people start on one path and they have to specialize and commit makes a lot of sense. So I'm really excited about this course because it's like broadening that. You're the perfect person. You've got this background that marries all these different disciplines. and brings it together. Why don't we jump more into like the course itself? Because APIs is a broad topic. You've got REST APIs, which have received the most sort of attention recently, but there's a lot of different APIs. So how do you possibly narrow down this course into like the right API technology that people will benefit from learning?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a right technology. There's a current technology. There's a popular technology, but it's each one's right for whatever it's done. And over the years, I've documented for a variety of different interface technologies, their protocols, and they all, once you've done a bunch or if you've done a few, they all sort of fall into a pattern. And so I want to focus on sort of that pattern, to recognize the pattern and identify the aspects of a REST API, because we'll be using REST API since that's the most supported and the most common. And it's kind of the one that everybody seems to understand, if you're talking to somebody else. And so we'll start there, but we'll spend, I think, one class or one lesson on, okay, so what are the elements of the REST API and what do they look like in other protocols? And so once you understand kind of the goes ins and goes outs, basically, and what does the reader want to know? Because that's always the fundamental question: is what do they need to know to be successful with this particular API? And what does that look like? And once you can kind of break it down into those pieces, then, if it's one API or another, the differences aren't so intimidating. Because oh, well, that's the input, that's the parameter, that's the response, that's the, what it returns. And each one does it a little differently. But the general principle of identifying what to document, is pretty much consistent throughout, the different protocols I've worked on, at least.
Yeah, I started out doing a lot of REST API stuff. Like back when I was working for a startup, when I had first switched courses or switched gears into the API documentation world, I was working for a startup and they had a REST API. And that kind of introduced me to the world. And I started developing some training and so on REST APIs. And then I got hired at Amazon and, the whole like method was different. It was all Java APIs. It wasn't where I was. I wasn't in AWS. I was in like the devices org, and in the devices section, you want to have like APIs or you want to have code that's like running on device and so on. So it's kind of a different world. But yeah, for 5 years, I was just working on Java related APIs, occasionally a cloud API in there. And then at Google, it's kind of the same story. For a lot of the APIs, they were Java-based APIs, and only recently have I been returning to documenting more REST APIs. But even the REST APIs, like it's not as if people write the spec in the Open API contract. Like they don't follow. Like it's at these big companies, they seem to have their own kind of process. So it's difficult to try to like prepare somebody and say, hey, you want to document an API, this is how it is. It's like, no, it could be totally different from one company to the next. You could be focusing on C++ APIs, and that's probably totally different. You might be using Doxygen or something. Like, how do you prepare students for this wide variety of technologies? It seems kind of overwhelming to just tell people, yeah, you could be working on like 5 different programming language based APIs or something totally different from that.
Well, hopefully I'm doing it all at the same time, at least not to start. But yeah, I think you described something that kind of mirrored my career experience, in that I don't think I've ever used the same authoring system twice. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that. REST API, I think, has happened at more than one place. So that's I've been around, and it's been around long enough for us to run into each other a few times. But yeah, it's like everything's different, and so teaching them a REST API or with the to the spec and all that, I think would be doing them a disservice. They would train them for one job, but that might not be the job they're looking for. or the job that's offered to them. And so, and I haven't worked on the same authoring system either. To complicate the technology matrix is like there's the technology you're documenting, and then the technology you're using to document that, and that's been different everywhere I've gone. I think pretty much without exception. And so learning how to do, markdown in some, what publishing system, pick your favorite, um, would train you for a job. But if you don't know how to generalize that, you'll only be able to have one job, and that's not the reality. So we're gonna what I want to try to do in the class is to say, okay, we're going to use REST APIs, and we're going to use the kind of GitHub pages because that's convenient, and try to identify, okay, well, here's what it's doing that other systems would do, and they might do it differently. But as long as you know what to look for, how do I edit? How do I publish? What's my version control? How do I, make changes and keep track of them? And if you know the questions to ask, then learning the new system becomes a lot less intimidating. It's like, okay, well, so what do you use to do this? What do you use to do this? Okay, great. Now I can get to work.
Yeah.
But if it's, where's the this command? We don't have one of those. Like, okay, well, I don't know what to do now. That wouldn't be a very effective education. And so I'm trying to go for to teach I guess my philosophy reflects my background is that I want to teach enough theory to know the questions to ask. I don't want it to be heavily theory based because they're not going to be, doing research. At least that's not what I'm preparing them for. But I want them to know where this comes from because it's going to change. And so if they know the foundation of the kind of the why behind the method, then when the method changes, they can go back to the why and say, okay, well, how do we do it, in a different method and still answer the same question.
Yeah, I
So
think that sounds like a great approach. And in my career, I think when I started out doing API documentation, I was thinking that it was more technical than it turned out to be. I got very focused on thinking that, oh, I've got to learn Java. I've got to understand C++. I've got to understand this code sample because everybody wants code samples. But as I've been in this field for a while, I've realized that what users really want, rather than really technical details, they want information about the data that the API is returning. They want to know, they want good descriptions of this content. And usually the engineers who describe the data, usually in the source files and so on, provide kind of hasty, confusing descriptions of the data being returned. So I've really tried to focus more on that. Don't really get a lot of questions and feedback from partners about how to actually use the API. It's more like, hey, we have questions about the data that you're giving us, and that's not really a hugely technical topic. It's much more accessible to tech writers. Now, I have another question. So as AI is becoming such a trending topic, I'm sure it's spilled over into your thoughts on API documentation and what to teach. What would you say if somebody said, we don't really need tech writers because users can just sort of plop in API reference code or reference generated Java doc or something and auto generate code samples and get an understanding of it. Like, you want to understand this method and what it returns. You don't need nice documentation. You just need to point somebody to the source. They throw it into an AI tool, and the AI tool kind of writes the documentation dynamically. Have you ever heard that kind of question and trend? What do you think of that?
Well, honestly, I think that's a bit uninformed. Everyone talks about AI like it's this mystical oracle of knowledge, but all that comes from somewhere, and that's one of the kind of contentious aspects of Chat GPT, for example, is, well, where exactly did that come from, and did you pay for that? Are you using my knowledge without my permission? And as a content creator, as an author, that's a bit of a concern. It's like, am I going to be writing stuff that someone's going to take and then use, and then they aren't going to need me anymore because they stole it, or took it without paying, if you want. So that's as and a lot of other artists that have had their art repurposed or ingested, I guess I'm not quite sure what the verb is, are concerned about. So, but again, back to the more practical point is like, well, we'll just have it read the code and write the docs. It's like, well, so the reading the code can tell you what it does, but it doesn't tell you why, or it doesn't tell you how. And knowing what it does is like, well, I could read the code and see what it does, and if I can't, it's probably not code that I want to use. If it's that complicated or that incomprehensible. But it's the I think the thing to take away from the what about AI question is it's like, just understand what its limitations are. If it needs content in order to reproduce content, well, where does that content come from? I thought there was an article, and I wish I looked it up because I'd love to quote it, that said that AI is going to need more technical writers to do that very purpose, to get the original content that then AI can reconstitute and repurpose and reorganize, and that might be a useful purpose. In that, if you give it enough good source content, then the machine can find different ways to interpret that for different questions. Okay, that might be a valuable use. I don't know if we have that yet, or we might have that for some of the older technologies that have been around for a while that have lots of content to ingest. But it all comes back to the why and how. It's like, is this doing something that's going to actually give us what we want? And sometimes it is, like when you're like using an established documentation set, and the AI is finding the topics for you so that you don't have to, or you don't have to work for it. Okay, that might be an advantage. But it can't find it if it doesn't exist. And so, when the AI can start looking at content and tell you why it's doing that, why did they invent that method? Why does that method return this particular object? Okay, well, that might be interesting. I don't know that we're there yet, but it can certainly tell you that it does that. But then but then reading the code, if reading the code is your documentation, that's disappointing. Because anybody who's read the code, it knows that that's not the shortest path to the destination. Because a lot of code is so modular and so microscopic that it's hard to see a big picture until you've looked at all of the code. And who has time for that? You're supposed to be using it, not reinventing it. And so documentation, if it's done right, not every documentation is done right, because I actually did a study on that. And if it's done right, it should make the path to being able to be productive quicker. Now, if it doesn't do it, then documentation failed. But that doesn't mean you don't need documentation. It just means you need better documentation so that it can do the job. But yeah, when it comes to AI, it's like, well, if it'll do what you want it to do and do it right, by all means. But make sure that that's the case.
Certainly interesting, all the different aspects of this, of uses and misuses and abuses and so on. It's kind of like watching a movie unfold, all the different things that are happening. But coming back to an early
bleeding edge terrain right now. So
coming back to an earlier point you made about the why, and how like the AI tool might tell you what's happening, but not why. That's super important. Just yesterday I was updating a release note engineers had sent me, and it basically said, hey, the value of this field is now 1. And I was like, okay, why did we make that change? What is the significance of this? Like, what problem did we solve here? And there's absolutely no information about this. It was just like, hey, this value is now going to be 1. And I'm like, okay, we need to unpack the why. And no AI tool. I even plugged this into BART, wondering if it would like magically reveal an answer. It didn't. It was like, but yeah, unpacking that why really requires a lot more discussion with engineers and understanding.
Well, and just knowing to ask the question.
Yeah.
And I think that's a kind of an unrecognized value of the technical writers, you would think to ask that. AI would say, okay,
Yeah.
fine. Poof, it's one. So,
There's another aspect that I think is kind of exciting for students with AI, because API docs have typically been very intimidating to a lot of people, especially without the programming and developer background. I think the AI can really make it understandable, especially for general introductory knowledge that a person might need. Like, what is this class? What is this method doing? Just it can really help somebody who's stumbling around in this field just to get oriented. Um, I, I've used, man, I've just been blown away by how helpful AI tools can be in some other areas. I was trying to understand some tax stuff earlier this week.
it's that time of year.
Like capital capital gains taxes and all the all kinds of details about the financial world that I don't fully understand, and it really helped me. But these are introductory novice questions. I even was solving a networking problem last night. I was like, I plugged in an Ethernet cable directly into my to an adapter to my computer, and it was slower than the wireless speed. How could that possibly be? And after like 5 minutes, it was like, oh yeah, your network adapter doesn't support gigabit Ethernet speeds. I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
of course. But applying these same things to API docs, I can see where like a technical writer who's stumbling through a new language or something could really kind of make sense of things in enough with enough kind of explanations and simplified understanding of things to be productive.
Yeah, no, it's good at that. I mean, just even like talking to Chat GPT for a few times, it does have a way to present complex topics in simple terms. Um, but if you already, so that would help the beginner and help them get started. I can see that. Um, as far as helping the expert, it's like the answer then seems kind of like, really?
Yeah.
That's not an answer. What are you, crazy? Um, I asked it. We asked it when it first came out. We asked it. It's like, okay, how would you land an airplane? And it went on and on. Well, you should just get close to the runway and touch down. It's like, really? That sounds like a good idea. I was thinking I'd crash, but no, that's not landing. That's crashing. And so the answer was just lots of words um, in that general direction. Um,
Yeah.
and so I wouldn't take flying lessons from Chat GPT just yet, but um, so yeah. But again, that gets back to its limitations. For someone coming into it, it can certainly speed the ramp up time. But at some point, you have to kind of let go and ride the bike without the training wheels. But if it can get you to that point faster, then great. Again, it all comes back to, is it going to do what you want it to do, and know when it can't help you anymore, so that you
Yeah.
don't rely on it too much. But we're still getting used to it, and it's still changing. So it's going to be kind of an adventure to see how that goes.
I think that for scenarios where you move outside of basic knowledge and get into more specialized knowledge, which is most of what we end up documenting at companies. The technique that I find most helpful, I believe, is called the retrieval augmented generation, where you supplement your queries with some kind of big chunk of text that it can then kind of draw upon to find more expert answers. And what is that chunk of text? It's usually documentation of some kind. so, so the need for this documentation it is still very much a reality, even if people are supplementing their
Mhm.
interactions with AI to kind of parse through your documentation. So,
Uh-huh.
anyway,
Oh yeah, and those combinations of kind of manual and automatic technologies are going to continue to evolve as we get better at talking to the AI, and the AI gets better at talking back to us. So it's what works today is going to be different tomorrow. So it's going to be hang on tight.
yeah, no, the next big phase is just right around the corner. I saw that like OpenAI is now officially launching their custom Chat GPT store or custom GPT store. Which like my immediate thought is, oh, great, we can have like a GPT trained on a specific manual and ask questions about that. And that'll be interesting to see if that becomes a trend. Anyway,
What
but
what would be nice,
yeah.
to follow up on that point, is it'd be nice to tell us what documentation we're missing. If
Oh,
you could say,
yeah.
well, I can explain this, but there's a hole here. Like, oh, so again, so you can work together. If it's just going to just repeat what I say, like, okay, well, that'll get us somewhere, but that's not going to find the holes. That'll just repeat what I felt we needed to say. But if it can say, well, this is explained, but this isn't, and then like file a ticket and say, could you explain this better so I can explain it better to the people asking? I think that'd be cool. It's I think there's ways for us to develop the partnership. It's not just all what can it do for us, but how can we work together, make it better for everybody.
I think, without going too far down this AI topic, I really think
It's
that
tempting.
that, that I think one role that tech writers will start to develop is like benchmarking tests for documentation against an API. I've been wanting to try this to kind of think, well, what are maybe 100 questions that users would probably want to know with this API, and let me see if an AI tool can like answer those questions based on this big body of documentation, and then where it can't, my role might be to go through the docs and add content until it can answer those questions. I don't know. I haven't come to that point yet. The part of the problem is that API documentation has so many different individual pages. Like a Java doc has 250 pages for one of my APIs, which is actually a small API. So how do you package up all of that information? How do you create a crawler, for example, that will index all that and feed it into an LLM? That seems a lot harder than
fortunately, most API documentation is or should be relatively structured. So it has a form that should be relatively easy to follow. Again, bad documentation is always going to be bad documentation, but if it's structured in an organized sense where you have like some hierarchy of classes for all the reference topics and some organization of how to and the conceptual explanation content, I would think that it would actually be easier because it does have at least the opportunity to apply a structure to. To help, and computers like structures and organization. So, and technical writers do too. So we should get along fine.
That reminded me of a post actually you wrote that is probably one of my favorite posts you've written. You had a post on your blog a few years ago about how like documentation is often the canary in the coal mine, where if a tech writer struggles to like describe and explain your documentation, if the tech writer finds it hard, it's probably a sign that there's something wrong with your API, that like some part of the design might not be well thought. And so, yeah, I usually think that when I'm writing something, I'm like, why is this so confusing? And I'm like, it's not you, Tom. It's not me. It's bad
because
design.
It's confusing. You're right on point,
Anyway, let's steer back a little bit into this course. So it's starting in March, and it's an evening course, runs for 14 weeks. And so, but one of those details are all on the UW website. One of the details that you've put there is you're going to help students put together portfolios. Can you talk a little bit about this approach? How are you going to how will you do the portfolio part? Like, are these going to be fictitious projects, real projects? Are they going to be are you going to have them document something real or something or technical around their house? What are your thoughts on the portfolio?
So that's some of the secret sauce I'm still cooking. So I've, some of the foundations that I believe strongly after studying and doing this for long enough is there are fundamental principles you need to understand. You need to understand the audience. You need to understand how developers attack documentation and what their motives and goals are, so that you can, meet them there. You have to understand the structure of the documentation to support those goals. And then, you have to understand that documentation or API documentation uh, serves a bunch of different purposes depending on where the reader is in their cycle with your, the kind of the acquisition and adoption cycle of the documentation. Some want to know, features to know, like at the early stages, they want to know, will this solve my problem? Will it, can I apply it to my problem? Can I be successful with it? And as they go through those stages of, acquisition and application, they have different interests and goals. And so as long as you can address those, then it doesn't really matter what you document. But because each product is going to have sort of a different way to, different take on that, because you're going to be writing about different products to different audiences for different tasks. And so understanding how to kind of like, measure the fit for the jacket, you have the arms and the chest and the collar and all that. So once you can do that, then you can make the jacket that fits. You can just get one off the rack that might be a little bit long or a little bit tight, but it still looks like a jacket. Okay, well, that's one approach. But, to get the kind of the premier documentation experience, you want a good fit. And so we'll be learning those skills at the kind of the first half of the class, and through kind of theory and practice. And the reason I stretched the class out for 14 weeks, we had talked about it shorter, but I don't think that's going to work. We need more time for this. Some of this stuff just needs time to bake. You have to like do it, think about it, come back, do it again, and think about it. And you can't do that in a seminar. Seminar is just sort of like absorb the knowledge dump, and then take some of that away with you. But API documentation is a hands-on skill, and so it's like learning woodworking or mechanics. You need to get in there and just get your hands dirty. And so I wanted to have time to kind of learn the theory, see the theory in practice, put it into practice, and then have time to do, your portfolio, which is sort of you driving solo at that point. And I figured, because of the technical challenges, I think we talked about, trying to, get everybody's computer with the software installed and learning, and teaching Git has always been, kind of personal demon of mine. But I we'll see if I have the answer this time. But I've been using and trying to get other people to understand how to use Git for almost 10 years now. And I don't know that it's ever been easy. It has gotten easier. The tools and the support, it's a lot more widely used. So there's a lot more support for it in the world. So there's a lot more resources to draw from. So I think maybe Git should be a little easier. But I'm planning. I want to allow time so that we have time to wrestle that to the ground. But the I guess back to the point is, like I said, API documentation is a hands-on skill. That's whose skills are founded in theory. And so I want to be able to kind of develop that understanding, and then give time to iterate and practice and review. And okay, we'll be peer reviewing the portfolios. And so I think that's kind of what makes it worth the cost, because it is expensive, but I want to make sure everybody gets their money's worth. And so I want them to be able to take away, have had the chance to do lots of practice, so that it's not just a portfolio. It's not just a static document. It's kind of an artifact of a whole process with a story behind it. And so I think that's what you can't get with self-study. It's a lot harder to do with self-study.
Coming back, you said something that jumped out at me. You said it is expensive, but I don't really think it is expensive at all. It says.
Oh, good. Sorry, can we put that in our promotion?
that didn't come out right. That makes me sound
really
like I've got
expensive.
money coming out of my pockets or something. Okay, so the cost of the course is $1,795, right? $1,795 for 14
It's a lot more
weeks.
expensive than free. So
now, keep in mind, before the pandemic, I was actually teaching 1-day API documentation workshops for like from 9 to 5 or something.
Mhm.
I charged $500, $600 per person for these workshops. It was a 1-day thing, in, out, at the end of the day, done in 1 day. And usually about 15 to 20 people. I only did like 3 of these, okay, because the pandemic just decimated everything. But That was, I thought at first, I thought, gosh, who's going to pay $500 for this? But there were lots of people. Honestly, I think it's a lot more lucrative to tap into the professional technical writers with corporate budgets for
Hmm.
training who just want like a 1 day exposure. But you're providing 14 weeks, multiple, a lot of class sessions. That's a lot of times for somebody to kind of soak in knowledge. I think that's a steal of a deal. If I offered somebody 14, I don't know how, is it one class a week, two classes a week?
Yeah, so it's 3 hours a week.
Okay, three
Um,
hours a week. So that's like the equivalent of, a
about a
lot of,
week, yeah, a
yeah,
week of
a
seminars.
lot of time. And yeah, if I were to offer somebody a full week of like API documentation workshop instruction, like immersively, I'd charge probably more than that by far.
Yeah,
And yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I was just gonna say that, but I think it's like baking a cake. You could turn the heat up to 500 and get it done in 5 minutes, but I don't know that you'd want to eat it. I think there's an advantage of doing it over a period of time where, like I said, you have time to let it soak in, and then come back with a question, and then have still
Yeah,
have 12 more classes that you could get that question answered in. Um, I think there's a place for the 1 day seminars or the 1 week seminars, and I've gone through those, and they're really intense. And I don't know how much I remember a week later, but
yeah,
depending on how they teach it. But I think soaking it over time should be a more effective learning experience than just trying to open the fire hose and take a drink, because there's a lot to it. You know that there's a lot to it. I'm impressed you
yeah.
could squeeze all that into a day. um,
Well, yeah, yeah. I agree that like there's a lot to it, and soaking things in over time is definitely the best way to learn something technical. Uh, I remember when I was preparing for some interviews at Google, I knew that they had a tech writing or a technical test and task, and so I was really trying to like learn Java. And every time I'm in the job market, I'm always like relearning Java, I feel like, because you have to know one programming language like good enough to persuade them. And so I would set myself a goal that I would like try to do a certain number of like Pomodoros, like 20-minute focus sessions every day. But over the course of like 2, 3 weeks, doing a couple hours a day, it was amazing how much progress I had made. And yeah, if I had tried to cram in a whole Java crash course in 1 day, it would have been overwhelming. So I do like your setup and the time frame. I think it's great, and you've got the patience and the expertise to answer so many questions. I I don't know how much patience I would have to answer the how do I install this question. Like just even get installed for people on Windows with different machines and different versions was just kind of like a nightmare. And then yeah, a lot of technical troubleshooting. Hopefully that's not a
well,
big of an
yeah,
issue,
I'm
but
I'm expecting. I mean, I'm hoping it doesn't happen, but I'm expecting there to be challenges.
yeah,
Um, so I'm doing lots of installation videos to help distribute my wisdom across the class a little bit easier. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, it's there's all kinds of places where things could get challenging, but hopefully with time, that's the other reason I wanted to have more time, is so we wouldn't let that kind of derail the course.
yeah. Well, Bob, we've talked about a lot of different things. Is there any other topics that you want to bring up in this discussion about API docs and academia and the course and so on?
No, I guess the only, I guess, closing thought that I'd have is that in going back to the last API, the docs dev portal, is that they were talking about, they had a presentation by a couple of the people that work for them about documentation usability, and they were citing some of the papers that I cited, and so it reminded me that I finally seen this come to pass. Is like there's always what is it that it takes 20 years to go from research to commercial application. And I've been doing this about 20 years, so it's like just in the nick of time. Because the studies I cited, and they were done in like 2004 about the kind of developer personas, and that was done by a researcher at Microsoft in 2003, 2004. And so I cited those in 2012, and now they're coming back and being represented or presented in 2024. So we're right on schedule.
That's great. So your syllabus will include some theory. It's not just going to be like a technical how-to. It's going to be some foundational stuff. And these are the papers that you're kind of incorporating in.
Yes, there's various papers. There's my favorite that I like to cite was done on how developers go in and out of the documentation while trying to do some technical programming task, and how they kind of bounce in and out, and how they because there isn't a whole lot of research that's been published on kind of how developers interact with documentation. We make lots of assumptions, but there's only been a few papers that I've seen that have published that. And so that's, every developer audience is a little bit different. And so you want to speak to yours, but it's always good to start with kind of a base of, well, it's probably somewhere in here, and then we'll figure out kind of which direction they go. Our audience, they might be more advanced, they might be more, specialized in something. So we want to take advantage of that, but we could start out with, well, we know they're going to be in here somewhere. And so those are kind of the things I want to teach. I want to teach them how to, come in and assess the situation based on the existing research and theory, and then, zero in on their audience and their product so that they can write the best documentation for them. And like I said, that's everywhere I've been, that's been slightly different. And so, but knowing that difference and taking and speaking to that is what will set the documentation apart that you're working on.
Yeah. Great. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure talking to you and hearing your thoughts. I enjoy having you as a colleague. We've run into each other in so many different parts of our career, from the blogosphere to the API, the docs, to Amazon and Google and so on. So I'm really excited to see you opening up these doors into API docs in the academia, and I really think that students will benefit from it. So thanks again, Bob. I'll add links to these things in the show notes. And if people want to find out more about you in general, where should they go?
Oh, just docsbydesign.com. DOCS by design.
Yeah. All right. I will definitely point them to that. Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Great. Thank you. It's good to talk to you again.